occasion for Westland, the west coast of the Southern Alps. 150 years ago, as you know, a deed was signed on this spot. In fact, the spot was probably back about 50 metres just behind us here now. Reuben Waite, who was the first settler here on the west coast, he came up the river on a steamer called the Nelson, and the green building over there, called DP1, was Deposit of Plan 1, that's why it's called that. That was the first site of any building here in Greymouth. But previous to that, Maori had been here for hundreds of years. About 1300, it is certain that they roughly come about that time. And they had little pars up and down the west coast, the main pars being here at Greymouth, and also at Bruce Bay, and also at the Turumacau River where they worked the Pounamu. Of course, that's why Maori were here on the west coast, and that was because of the Pounamu and the treasured greenstone of the time. They used to work it at the Turumacau Par site, that is on the Cameron side of the river, and they did that there because they didn't want other Maori to know that they were getting it out of Aotearoa and up in the Griffin Range area. So they'd bring it along there to actually just make sure that other people didn't know where to go. At that point, they used to work the greenstone, they used to work it, carry it down the beach, up the Grey River here, also worked it at Mawhera Par here. They worked it up the Arnold River then, because that was the best mode of transport, of course, up the rivers, and they took it across Harper's Pass back over to the Canterbury side. Here at Greymouth, you had, when the white man first and Europeans first come here, you had Chief Tarapui. He was the chief of the Mawhera here, and he was the chief up until 1864 when he died. Then Wirata Tainui, and you've got Wirata and Tainui streets named after him, and you've also got Waite Street over here after Waite, but he took over in 1864 as the chief, and he died in actually 1880. When in 1860 the actual settlement deed, that was James Mackey, came down here for purchase, he was sent down by the governor. He was sent with £400, and he said, do your best, but here's £400, don't pay any more. James Mackey come down and he negotiated with 14 chiefs up and down the west coast and finally cut a deal at £300. So on the 21st of May 1860, and it is recorded in the deed as Under the Shining Sun, exactly the repeat of today, they signed that deed. And the 14 Maoris all put X's. Wirata Tainui, he actually said on the day that no one will contest his ownership because he had eaten the previous person that actually owned the land. And he was quite proud of that. But they signed up the deal, Mackey packed up everything, and he headed back to Nelson. In those days, you had to go across the Grey River by canoe, and on the way across on the canoe capsized. It's well documented. The actual stains are still on the deed from the water stains where it got wet, and he nearly lost his £100 that he had in his pocket. So that concluded the deed, and then from that day on, Maori had kept out a certain part of Greymouth and other reserves around the coast, which they, as we all know then, three years later, the great gold rushes began, and Maori did very well from the rentals from it. In those days, £5,000 a year. So Wirata and the actual Mawhera tribe were up here, living mainly up on the terraces just in behind Greymouth. In fact, Wirata Tainui's house was where the motel is up on Smith Street. That's exactly the site where he lived for many, many years. And then eventually they had a burial ground up in the quarry here, over the back here, and when they needed the quarry rock to build the tip heads out for the river, reclamation down here, the actual burial ground that had 8 chiefs in it were, they had to move those remains that were in there. So they brought a high priest down from the North Island, and that high priest lifted the tapus and did all the right procedures and took those bodies down to the base of Blaketown Lagoon, where they buried them. Subsequently, they exhumed those bodies again later and moved them to Aotearoa, where they remain today. So that is the story, and it is a great history, the Maori history here, and I think it's something we need to preserve today. That'll be recognised with Makawhio and Ngāti Waiwai, who represent Ngā Tahu here on the west coast. And I have talked to Maori recently, and eventually we want to actually recreate the history of that cave, which was an open cave. People could actually go, even in the 1860s, you could actually go into the cave and see the remains in that cave before they actually moved it. So that'll be a project we can actually do over the next few years. But I would like to now call on Mary Tulloch. Mary is the oldest living member of Ngāti Waiwai to assist me on this momentous occasion in unveiling this plaque in remembrance to that deed that was signed way back in 1860 between James Mackey and the Maori chiefs. Thank you.